Hi guys, Tevis here. I'm an aspiring home chef. I do a lot of the cooking in our family, and I thought it would be kind of fun to put together some recipes to share my love for cooking and what I enjoy. This series is going to be a kind of looking at comfort foods, and whether it be from us, from our friends. I'm gonna kind of show the recipes, prepare them, and kind of show what makes them our own and what we do differently based on what might be the kind of standard way to do things. So this recipe is from my grandmother, Mary Lou. It comes from the Family and Friends cookbook that has been passed down through my family. This cookbook is older than I am, but it's recipes that I grew up eating. So it has a special place in my heart because they were things my mother made for me as a child. The biscuits and gravy has always been a thing that I've really enjoyed. I eat it for breakfast, lunch, dinner, kind of whenever. I don't mind having it at any time. I don't make it as often as I probably want to, but when I do, I absolutely love it, and we have lots of requests when we have friends and family come over for me to make this exact recipe. So basic buttermilk biscuit recipe: 2 cups flour, 3 tablespoons baking powder, 1/2 tablespoon salt, 1/4 tablespoon baking soda, 2 tablespoons shortening, and 1 1/4 cup buttermilk. And then what you're going to do is you're going to take a little bit of vegetable oil or olive oil or whatever type of oil you have, and you're going to coat both sides of the biscuit. And for the gravy, 1/3 cup flour, 3 cups milk, salt and pepper, and then your choice of sausage. I personally go for Jimmy Dean sage sausage, as I have found that it has really good flavor. Like I said, this is going to be highlighting recipes that I enjoy and that I find as comfort foods, and kind of why I want to do that. This has been one where biscuits and gravy is simple, and you can make it real fancy, or you can keep it super classic. Like I said, optionally, cheddar, jalapenos, chives. We've even done bacon bits on ours in the past. Just kind of make them fun, make them your own. You can do them super basic. I highly recommend doing this from scratch because biscuits are not hard, and it's substantially better than store-bought biscuits. And at the end, 450-degree oven for about 15 minutes. And as soon as you put the biscuits in the oven, start on your gravy because they'll be ready about the same time. I hope you enjoy this. I'm going to be cooking it here in the next clip, and follow along, tell me what you think, try it on your own, and let me know how it goes. So take your 3 cups flour, I personally use a stand mixer. You don't want to over mix your biscuit mix, but if you are pretty comfortable and watch it, then it's not going to be bad. And then in the other ramekin was the baking powder, salt, baking soda, and the shortening. And here I am adding the buttermilk. Don't have to go fancy on the buttermilk, just whatever. This is just, I think, Dairy Gold, and I got a little extra, so I wanted to put it back and make sure that I abided as close to possible to the recipe for this sake. But honestly, with this biscuit recipe, you don't have to be precise. Just make it as good as possible, and a little bit here or there, not gonna hurt. Beat on low. I'm using a dough hook here, low speed. Just make sure it gets incorporated and it forms a ball and is moistened by the buttermilk. Here's a good chance to add things once it's started to form a ball. It's not quite all a cohesive unit yet. As you can see, it's getting there. But here's where I add my fun things. So I'm adding just cheddar. I don't usually measure it. I just kind of eyeball it, and I'm cutting up some chives for this recipe. We had a friend eating with us that night where she wasn't as necessarily liking as spicy as food as possible, or as much as my wife and I do. So I opted for chives to add a little bit of extra instead of jalapeno, but normally my wife and I do jalapeno. You're gonna want to get the chives as finely chopped as possible without just absolutely pulverizing them. The cheddar, not as bad. Just mix that in, and here I am just kind of scraping down the sides of the stand mixing bowl and just getting that loosely incorporated. And scraping off the dough hook, making sure it's all generally forming a ball together. As you can see here, pretty well one solid piece. And you're gonna leave some residue on the sides of the stand mixer. Not a bad thing. Don't worry about it. Take your not your baking sheet, but your cutting board, lightly flour it so you have a good surface to work on. And then I take a rolling pin that's lightly dusted with flour as well. Here I am doing that. And then just start to flatten out and get just a general thickness of the biscuits. And I didn't quite get enough flour, and buttermilk, it can be very tacky, and you might have some stickage. So here I am. I add some flour right directly to the top of it and a little bit more on the rolling pin, and it works out well. There's with biscuits, there's a lot of room for error, so I'm not stressed. A lot of baking involves precise measurements. Biscuits are not that. People might argue the opposite. I've never had one turn out horribly wrong. There have been times where they've been better than others, obviously, but these ones turned out very delightful. So, got it to a general, relative thickness. And then add a little bit of olive oil to your baking sheet. And to the right there, you can see a pint glass. My grandmother used a baby food can to cut her biscuits. I like my biscuits on the big side, so I use a pint glass, and I think it works well. Just lightly dust it and with flour, and it works well. It makes good sized biscuits. And then your thickness can you can vary your thickness so they're not massive. These are relatively thin because I like a thinner, wider biscuit personally. And then take them, like I said, coat them in both sides with the olive oil. That works well if you get enough olive oil on your baking sheet. Just do a quick little flip on there and get both sides coated. And then proceed until you've used up all of your biscuit mix. My grandmother claims that the recipe can make 18 2-inch biscuits. 2-inch biscuits to me are very, very small. So I personally like on the big side, so I make 5 to 6, 7, maybe 8 of the bigger size. And I take, right here, you can see I'm gathering the remnants, and I'm going to flatten it out again, kind of reform it into a new piece to cut some pieces out. And then the last one I usually just take and kind of make a blob from the remainder. And honestly, that's one of my favorite pieces, and my wife and I lots of times will fight over that. This right here, I'm turning this into 6 biscuits, which I think is fair, and that's pretty normal for what I get. The only problem with when you're cutting and then you're reforming, cutting, reforming, you're really working that dough a lot, and then you can really you can cause a lot of issues with that, where I said you didn't want to over mix the biscuits. So that's about where I would draw the line on that one. I wouldn't do it again. I've already browned my sausage. Biscuits are in the oven. Sausages, everyone can cook. Hopefully everyone can cook sausage. I add a little bit extra butter because I like it a little fattier, and it makes, it does well with the gravy to add that extra butter. So I melt an additional half stick of butter in there. And then start to add your flour to the sausage, and to absorb that, and you'll start making a roux. You want to go, very, small amounts, and as you start to incorporate, then you start to add more, You don't want to dump it all in at once. I did it in 2 batches here. Usually I break it up into 3 or 4, but for this one, I did 2. It turned out good. It's one of those things where the more you do it, the more comfortable you get. The last thing you want to do is burn it. I use cast iron for gravy every single time. It works well. And then you're going to want to slowly incorporate your 3 cups milk. So I do about 1/3 of it at a time, and then start to mix. And then as it thickens, it'll thicken pretty quick for the first little bit. So you start to add it, it'll thicken, add a little bit more. Keep going. There's the biscuits coming out of the oven, and my last of my milk going in. At this point, it's not quite as thick in the last little bit, but it sets up pretty quick. Dogs keep making little cameos, so that's still a little runny for my personal take in gravy. Some people like runny gravy, some people like thick gravy. I'm kind of in the middle there, but when you start to see those bubbles coming, it's cooking, it's doing its magic. It'll be pretty quick. I also like to use a spoon to get kind of a general idea of the consistency and to do a taste test. That's pretty dang good. And here I am just adding more fresh ground pepper right on the top of it to add a little bit more flavor, and just to give it kind of, gravy, when you get a lot of milk in there, it can kind of turn, kind of more or less flavorless. Adding a lot of extra pepper definitely helps. These biscuits were pretty dang hot, and so therefore I, kind of mangled that first one, but they're pretty dang good. Nice golden brown bottom that I personally care for. I like that lure. It's a little crunchier on the bottom. I find that to be nice. And there you can see the steam coming off of those things. They're piping hot. That cheddar melts nicely, and I wish I would have gone a little heavier on the chives, but you can still taste them. It's still added to it, and it was rather delightful. And then give yourself a couple good spoonfuls of gravy. Get those biscuits nice and coated. This doesn't store too well. The gravy doesn't, at least, but gravy's pretty quick and easy to make. So, the biscuits, they're good heated up the next morning, or we'll put up just jam and butter on them the next day, and they turn out well. But for the most part, the gravy, you got to use it up that day. And what's a good YouTube cooking video without some glamour shots? Highly recommend. Very good.